Welcome to the 700 Club. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrives in the U.S. today. If you get a chance, look at his flight path across where he goes along the Mediterranean because he doesn't want to cross the airspace of any European country in fear that somehow or other they'll intercept his jet and force it to land and arrest him. Well, he's going to address the United Nations General Assembly tomorrow and meet with President Trump on Monday.
A Houthi drone injured more than 20 people in the Israeli resort town of Eilat yesterday. Israel's defense minister is promising devastating response. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
The drone, videotaped from multiple angles on social media, slipped through Israeli defenses and left at least 22 people wounded, 2 seriously. Defense Minister Israel Katz said the Houthi terrorists refused to learn from Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza and will learn the hard way. Whoever harms Israel will be harmed sevenfold. Before leaving for New York to address the UN General Assembly, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a message to the people of Israel and denounced those calling for a Palestinian state.
At the UN General Assembly, I will speak our truth, the citizens of Israel, the truth of the IDF soldiers of our country. I will denounce those leaders who, instead of denouncing the murderers, rapists, and child burners, want to give them a state in the heart of the land of Israel. This will not happen.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told CBS News that the declaration stopped the ceasefire hostage negotiations.
It actually derailed, it made talks that were going on. It made it even harder to get Hamas to enter into concessions that might have brought this to an end.
After President Trump's speech at the UN on Tuesday, he met with Arab and Muslim leaders. He presented a plan to end the war in Gaza and reportedly said he would stop Israel from declaring sovereignty over the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. Oren Seliger of the Yessa Council, a group representing communities in Judea and Samaria, told CBN News that declaring sovereignty is a way to stop a Palestinian state.
We have to basically end that dream and end that fantasy. The way to do that is to make it clear that we are here and we are here to stay. We do that by declaring sovereignty on Judea and Samaria.
Now all eyes are on Netanyahu's speech on Friday and a planned meeting between President Trump and Netanyahu at the White House on Monday. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, I have to say the reason the talks, the so-called peace negotiations, stopped is because Hamas made a declaration that they would never, ever lay down their arms, that it was impossible for them to do that. That's what derailed it, and that's what led to the attack in Doha, because they said, well, we cannot do this. It's in our very founding charter. We want to eliminate Israel from the map. We want to wipe it out. That's the whole reason there's this cry from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means no Jews. That means no Israel. And that means they can never lay down their arms. They will continue this fight again and again. They have promised October 7th over and over again. It's time for the world to believe that promise. It's time for all leaders to believe that promise and say, our real enemy here is not Israel, and this war is not Israel's fault. It's entirely the fault of Hamas. In other news, there's been another act of political violence in America. A gunman opened fire at an immigration facility in Dallas yesterday. George Thomas has that story and more from the CBN newsroom. George?
That's right, Gordon. The gunman killed 1 detainee and injured 2 others. A shell casing found near the shooter had the words anti-ICE written on it. CBN's Jenna Browder reports.
Authorities are calling it an act of targeted violence after a gunman opened fire from a rooftop outside an Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention facility in Dallas. 1 detainee died and 2 others were injured. Authorities say the gunman was 29-year-old Joshua John, who fired randomly at the building and a van filled with detainees before turning the gun on himself.
Rounds that were found near the suspected shooter contain messages that are anti-ICE in nature.
Authorities releasing this photo, the words anti-ICE written on a shell casing found near the gunman. Not dissimilar to Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin, who also wrote on his ammunition. Donnell Harvin, former D.C. Chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence, last night on CBN's Faith Nation.
These folks emulate each other. I don't like to use the word copycat because they're not actually doing the same thing, but they're taking some of the same tactics, techniques, and procedures that we've seen. It's intended to send a specific message. It's intended to really stoke fear in the population that they're targeting.
Vice President J.D. Vance responding to the attack.
There's some evidence that we have that's not yet public, but we know this person was politically motivated.
And Texas Senator Ted Cruz on the ground in Dallas with sharp words for Democrats and their language about ICE.
This must stop. To every politician who is using rhetoric demonizing ICE and demonizing CBP, the divisive rhetoric tragically has real consequence.
No ICE agents were hurt in this shooting, but officials say threats and attacks against ICE agents are up 1,000% since January. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
In his speech to the United Nations Tuesday, President Trump called on world leaders to protect religious freedom. He also said Christianity is the most persecuted faith in the world. Christians in South Korea are concerned for their freedom after the arrest of a prominent Christian pastor. As Lucille Talusan reports from Seoul, many are calling this event a wake-up call for Korea's church.
If I am imprisoned, it will prove that Korea is no longer free. Reverend Chan Bo-son made that statement just before entering the police station for a pre-trial hearing on September 8th. Despite being a preliminary session, the court approved his arrest warrant and detained him immediately. Charges against Pastor Son include violating election laws, specifically for interviewing a candidate on issues the government interpreted as illegal campaigning. Authorities cited risk of flight and destroying evidence as the reasons for his detention.
To a senior pastor that has been ministering the same church for the last over 30 years and being present for the people and the church members and giving back to the community, serving for the community. The concern of escape that the court says makes no sense, and I believe that this is just a political retaliation.
Pastor Son first drew government scrutiny during the COVID-19 pandemic, when his church defied restrictions limiting gatherings to just 5 people. The church was fined and at one time shut down. Last year, Pastor Son organized a rally, mobilizing 2 million people on-site and online to oppose the proposed comprehensive anti-discrimination law, which critics say would criminalize preaching against homosexuality and restrict religious speech.
I think this is a targeted arrest. I think the government is trying to send a message across the nation against all Christians in Korea to be quiet and to comply with the government's aggression against conservatives and Christians in Korea.
Behind me is the Young Rock Church, one of Korea's oldest churches, founded by North Korean pastor Reverend Han Kyung-jik in 1945. With 150 years of Christian history in Korea, Pastor Son's arrest is seen by many as a wake-up call, not only to defend religious freedom, but to remind the church of its role to protect democracy.
I think, in part, the fault lies with the Korean church. I believe this is sort of a punishment from God. Our ancestors of faith have gone through many trials, so we too can have the faith, but we disregarded that gift of faith.
Church historian Myung-soo Park told CBN News that South Korea's economic success has historically paralleled the vitality of its church. But he now warns that such religious freedom is gradually diminishing.
Just recently, prayer and Christian activities in Christian schools are being suppressed to avoid discrimination against their non-Christian students. The government has put restrictions in sharing our Christian beliefs in public.
Park believes that a united voice from both American and Korean evangelical communities can create a stronger, more impactful call for Pastor Son's release and broader religious freedom. Lucille Talusan, CBN News, Seoul.
Thank you, Lucille. And Gordon, imagine this is happening in a country that boasts some of the largest churches today in the world, right?
And boasts that it's a free democracy and that they model their freedoms on the United States. The churches founded in South Korea in 1945. It was after great persecution from the Japanese during the Japanese occupation in World War II. That church has gone through the fire and come out, but it looks like there's fire back in it. Let's get specific on what the accusations are. There's a Public Official Election Act that was passed recently in Korea. There was another one about Educational Autonomy Act. And the violations are two. One, he made public remarks endorsing and talking about supporting particular candidates for public office. That's what he did. The next thing he did is he had a superintendent, and this is part of the educational autonomy. He had an interview with that superintendent who was standing for office. He had that interview inside the church, and then he took that content and he posted it to YouTube. That's what he did. In the United States, we would call that something that a citizen has a right to do, that you have a right to participate in the political process. You have free speech and freedom of assembly, freedom to petition your government for a redress of wrongs. But here in South Korea, they're saying we want to clamp down on this. It's not permitted for churches to comment on political election. It's not permitted for them to comment on the educational system. And that comment is an interview with someone running for that office. It's mind-boggling to me that a free and open society would try to clamp down on that. Don't think that this can't happen in the United States. I have heard it publicly said that it's unconstitutional for a pastor to endorse a political candidate. I've actually heard that expressed. And when I hear that, I went, you've got to be kidding me. Do you not know the Bill of Rights? You look at the Colorado Baker cases, and he took that all the way to the Supreme Court and won on a First Amendment right of expression that he didn't have to violate his conscience, and they kept coming at him. You know, we have to be aware of what's happening on the so-called progressive left. They want to clamp down on individual liberty. If you don't agree with their ideology, they want to put you in jail. That's clearly what's happening in South Korea. He organized a protest against gay rights, had 2 million people show up in the streets, and now you see the backlash, and he's been in jail. And that's what he's been charged with. Can you imagine? I posted something on YouTube, and that's going to get me in jail? Well, that's what's happening today in South Korea. The entire church all around the world needs to awaken to this. This isn't some isolated thing. These ideas are spreading around the world. How do we clamp down on Christianity? How do we clamp down on Christian expression? We're going to start calling it hate speech. We're going to start throwing invective that you want Christian nationalism and that at the core of it, you're all white supremacists and all of this. It's absolutely incredible what's happening in the world, but we need to be aware of it. And most importantly, we need to stand and not be cowed by it and not go off into some corner and say, well, we're just going to keep quiet. No, now more than ever, we need to proclaim the gospel to a lost and hurting world.